I want to talk today about the Shakespearean sonnet. Shakespeare is the name you most often associate with sonnets when you think about the sonnet as a form of poetry. So, remember that during the 16th century, if you wanted to be a successful artist, you had to gain some sort of patronage, and that was a wealthier person who funded your artistic endeavors. So, seeking to gain the patronage of a certain nobleman, Shakespeare began devoting most of 1593 and 1594 to narrative poetry. Now, Shakespeare's sonnets broke many norms for the day, whereas most of the time a sonnet would be devoted to, or the subject would be a young, beautiful, blonde, chaste, virginal beauty. Shakespeare rather focused on a young man, not a young woman, which was an almost unprecedented choice. And his subject was a dark and sensuous and sexually promiscuous mistress, which set it very much at odds with the virginal blonde that was the subject of many sonnets of the day. Shakespeare's sonnets also spanned and explored the full gamut of mood and emotion. He explored the highest highs and the lowest lows, including delight, pride, melancholy, shame, disgust, and fear, not simply conforming his work to what was the Renaissance man, the despairing Petrarchan lover that was in vogue at the time. Shakespeare's sonnets told stories, and the sequence in which they have been collected and published suggests an overarching narrative. Now, whether or not Shakespeare intended this or not, we're not sure. However, when you arrange the sonnets into certain groupings, a flow seems to emerge from and through all of them. And so there are certain ways in which we have collected and grouped and published his sonnets. And these are according to the common motifs that we can find when we study them. First, sonnets 1 through 17. These are introductory sonnets, and they celebrate the beauty of a young man. And Shakespeare, you can see, is urging the young man to marry and have children who will bear his very beautiful image, and we will look at one from that introductory series in just a moment. Sonnets 18 through 26 comprise a very long sequence of sonnets, and it's passionately devoted to the beloved young man, and the dominant motif is the transience and destructive power of time, which can only be sort of mitigated through the force of love and the eternal nature of poetry. And the last group of sonnets, 127 through 152, are focused very much on the dark lady, who is an alluring but degrading object of desire. And some sonnets, such as the one I referenced in this slide, 144, seem to suggest maybe a love triangle between the speaker, the beloved male friend, and the woman. And still yet others in this section, in this sequence of sonnets, take notice of, maybe even take jabs at, rival poets of the time such as George Chapman and Christopher Marlowe. There is a unique yet predictable meter and rhyme scheme to Shakespeare's sonnets. You have 3 quatrains, which, if you'll take a look at the first part of the word quatrain, think about quarter or quartet. It means a set of 4. So you have 3 sets of 4 lines, and Shakespeare uses these 12 lines to develop an extended metaphor. And then he closes his sonnets with a closing couplet, which just from inference, is a set of two lines that it might either confirm or pull sharply against the metaphor that has preceded it. Shakespeare's sonnets as a whole are strikingly intense, conveying a sense of high psychological and moral stakes. They are also remarkably dense, written with a daunting energy, concentration, and compression. Often, the main idea of the poem may be grasped quickly, but the precise movement of thought and feeling, the links among the shifting images, the syntax, tone, and rhetorical structure prove immensely challenging. These are poems that famously reward rereading. Here's the work I used. If you would like to look into that as well, a very good source. And I want to take a look right now at a couple of Shakespeare's poems, his sonnets. Starting with sonnet number 2. When 40 winters shall besiege thy brow, and dig deep trenches in thy beauty's field, thy youth's proud livery, so gazed on now, will be a tattered weed of small worth held. Then, being asked where all thy beauty lies, where all the treasure of thy lusty days, to say within thine own deep sunken eyes were an all-eating shame and thriftless praise. How much more praise deserved thy beauty's use, if thou couldst answer, this fair child of mine shall sum my count and make my old excuse, proving his beauty by succession thine. This were to be new made when thou art old, and see thy blood warm when thou feel'st it cold. Let's take a look at the first line. When 40 winters shall besiege thy brow. And it's very interesting to note that Shakespeare is talking about the passage of time, but how is he talking about the passage of time? First, he describes time as winters, 40 winters. Winter, of course, is a time when things are dead. The bare tree limbs simply remind us of the life and the greenery that was once there. Now, of course, during Shakespeare's time, the average lifespan was not quite as long as it is today. 40 would be pushing toward the end of life. If you were 20 or so, you would have probably already been married and seen a few children die. You might have even witnessed your wife die in childbirth. So, 40 winters. He isn't talking about a calm, beautiful passage of time. He's talking about a dramatic and traumatic shift from the beauty of spring and the vibrancy of summer, and even the gentle grace of dying that autumn suggests. He jumps immediately to winters, when 40 winters shall besiege thy brow. And it's interesting that Shakespeare uses the word besiege, not graces, not walks upon, not treads thy brow. He uses besiege, which is very much a military term. When one army would besiege another, would besiege a city, they surrounded it to attack it. It's an all-out assault. So this first line, Shakespeare is introducing us to the destructive nature of time. When 40 winters shall besiege thy brow, talking about one's forehead, one's eyebrows, of course, and dig deep trenches in thy beauty's field. Of course, he's talking about the destructive dermatological effects of the passage of time. Dig deep trenches in thy beauty's field. The deep trenches, of course, are the furrows dug in one's forehead. Beauty's field. He's given us the image of perhaps a plowman plowing in a field. And if you ever have seen a plow point, it is very sharp on one end, and it spans out so that it can thrust the dirt, the clay, away from the furrow that you are digging, and makes a ridge, a hill just to the side. So it's almost as though he's saying time is a treacherous plowman, and he and his oxen have plunged their plow into your face, thy beauty's field, and are wreaking havoc, digging out deep trenches. One could also perhaps see a military connotation here, connecting with the word besiege here. One thinks, and of course this was many years after Shakespeare, but one also thinks of World War I and II, where they had trenches in otherwise beautiful fields. Flanders Fields, the old poem, comes to mind. When 40 winters shall besiege thy brow, and dig deep trenches in thy beauty's field, thy youth's proud livery, so gazed on now, will be a tattered weed of small worth held. First of all, if you'll remember, Middle English has two types of pronouns, meaning the word you. Thy, thine, and thee are singular pronouns, and you, ye, yours are plural pronouns. So he's talking to one specific person here: thy brow, thy beauty's field, thy youth's proud livery. He's talking to, of course, the young man. Thy youth's proud livery. Now, livery is the randiness, the greenery, the beauty that is springtime, that is youth, that is vitality. Thy youth's proud livery, so gazed on now. This indicates that this young man is very beautiful, because he simply walking down the street with his carefree devil-may-care livery, his exuberance for life, and coupled with his beauty, causes people to stop and gaze and stare. But Shakespeare warns him that after 40 winters have attacked your face and you are old and wrinkled, thy youth's proud livery, so gazed on now, will be but a tattered weed of small worth held. Shakespeare is reminding us that the passage of time makes what we seem to value so much now, beauty and vitality, it will render it useless. He immediately connects this to the next quatrain. Then being asked where all thy beauty lies, where all the treasure of thy lusty days, to say within thine own deep sunken eyes were an all-eating shame and thriftless praise. He's saying at this point, when your beauty has deteriorated, if someone were to ask you, where is this beauty that you once held that is just a tattered weed now? Where's all the treasure of your lusty days, of your exuberance and your proud livery? Where is all that? To allege then that, why, I still have it. It is here, within me, look into my deep sunken eyes, and it's almost a skeletal image that Shakespeare gives us here. To say within thine own deep sunken eyes were an all-eating shame and thriftless praise. It is praise that means very little, and it is a shame, like a canker, like a cancer that eats away at one's own dignity, to say that I still retain my beauty, even though obviously you don't. You are very old and decrepit. Shakespeare then leads us to the last quatrain, where he says, how much more praise deserved thy beauty's use, if thou couldst answer, this fair child of mine shall sum my count and make my old excuse, proving his beauty by succession thine. Shakespeare's saying, how much better would it be should you have, when you have reached that 40th winter, going on your 41st winter, how much more praise deserved thy beauty's use? What better way to put your beauty to use than to have children? Have this fair child of mine, shall sum my count, shall make all of my days worth something, proving his beauty by succession thine. Succession, think of a king or queen, and they bear the title, bear the honor, bear the crown of their mother or father. So he's saying this beauty that you have will be passed down as one would crown a successor. And yet it is still thy beauty. How many times do we look at somebody and say, well, he's got his daddy's eyes, or he's got his mother's nose, he's just the spitting image of his uncle? Shakespeare's saying their beauty is more than just yours. It is to be shared. Someone as beautiful as you should share your beauty while you still have vibrance, while you are still in your huge, proud livery. He's saying that a beauty like yours, young man, should be passed down. This were to be new made when thou art old, and see thy blood warm when thou feelst it cold. This were to be new made when thou art old. He's saying it would be as though everything old is new again. And your blood, your very blood, you would see your blood warmed in the proud exuberance of your fair child, even though yours is growing cold, and in that sense your child would lend a warmth to your own blood and make your beauty anew, albeit in the beauty of another. So let's read the sonnet again with this analysis and this understanding. When 40 winters shall besiege thy brow, and dig deep trenches in thy beauty's field, thy youth's proud livery, so gazed on now, will be a tattered weed of small worth held. Then, being asked where all thy beauty lies, where all the treasure of thy lusty days, to say within thine own deep sunken eyes were an all-eating shame and thriftless praise. How much more praise deserved thy beauty's use, if thou couldst answer, this fair child of mine shall sum my count and make my old excuse, proving his beauty by succession thine. This were to be new made when thou art old, and see thy blood warm when thou feelst it cold.